heroes. Good morning to the West Coast. Good afternoon to the East Coast. Good day to everyone in between and beyond. It is I, your friendly neighborhood Rabbi John Carrier, here for another edition of the Jew Curious Show live. We are broadcasting on Twitch TV. That's a wonderful platform for live casting videos. We are also simulcasting on Facebook and YouTube. And today is another one of our Monday morning Ask Me Anything sessions. Anything you've ever wanted to ask a rabbi, but maybe were afraid to ask, and thought the rabbi might get all judgy on you, that might be upset by your questions or something like that. There's not a lot question-wise that can upset me. You can make some statements that I'll get upset, but I'll try to keep it cool here today. I will say, if you want to ask your questions live, the best thing to do is join us on Twitch. And you can join us at twitch.tv/Jew Curious. I'll be monitoring that for live Q&A. If you would like to leave a question either on the Facebook chat stream, Facebook comments, that's okay too. YouTube comments, YouTube live chat, you can do it there too. I check those at the end of the broadcast and make sure that everybody gets their questions asked. But if you want to ask a question live, please consider joining us on Twitch. If you don't have a Twitch account, it's about as easy, or if not way easier, than setting up an account on YouTube or on Facebook. Just takes a second, and then you can join us live. And already seeing some friends here. Nawas64 says Shavua Tov. I say Shavua Tov also. That means good new week. Happy new week. It means week good. So it's funny. I'm surprised. I made this video on YouTube called what does Shavua Tov mean? And every week I get a big spike in traffic on that video. On like Sundays and Mondays, it's my most popular video because somebody said to them, "Hey, Shavua Tov." You're like, "Okay, buddy, let me go look up what that means." And so it's also the lead income generator over for my YouTube advertising, which is a new thing for me. Christy B says, "Good morning, everyone. We got a Boker Tov Lekulam from Dewalexin." I don't know if I've seen you here before, Dewalexin, but I'm certainly glad to see you here for the first time, or again, as the case may be. Sometimes I forget stuff. I'll say Boker Or back to you. Shavua Tov Nawa 64 says, KG Wilcox, good morning, and CJ Mays 28 says, hola. So, hola, and buenos dias to CJ Mays. So, it's only fair if I'm going to show up, I'm going to show my face, such as it is. Good morning, everybody. So, getting a little bit of the move juice going in here. Okay, now we can get started, says Tom Waits, sings stormy weather. Okay, enough of that. CJ May says, well, Rabbi John, HUC rabbinical interview is in December. That's so cool. Mazel tov. So, yeah, very excited for you. I'll say it's no job for a nice Jewish boy, as they say, but I like it. I'll say being a rabbi certainly beats working for a living. So if rabbinical school is your bag, go for it, brothers and sisters, and I'll give you whatever I've learned, whatever advice I can. It can be a real ordeal sometimes. It can be a real mind bender. I remember my first year of rabbinical school. I felt like all this pressure, like I was carrying the weight of the Jewish tradition on my shoulders, to the extent that when I was taking a modern Hebrew class and had a rough week, I had a vocab quiz or grammar quiz or something, and I got a C- on my quiz, and I went home like dejected. I thought, I didn't just get a C- on my quiz, I got a C- on behalf of the Jewish people. And I was like, that's a lot of pressure. And then later on, I just, I kind of got over that. So it's like, nope, it's just a guy having a bad day in a Hebrew quiz. So I am pretty devoted to the Jewish people. I will confess to that. I don't know that I would be in what I'm doing if I wasn't, but sometimes it's just school. So just take it that way. If anybody has questions about what it means to go to rabbinical school, what it takes to get into rabbinical school, things like that, please shoot them at me. This is Ask Me Anything, after all. Let's see. CJ May says, coming to LA campus, so sushi lunch on me. All right. Ping me. Let me know when you're going to be here. It looks like December. We'll have some sushi lunch. Maybe we'll do like a meetup if anybody wants to get together with me and CJ Mays for some sushi. You don't have to buy it for everybody, CJ, so don't worry. But that could be a fun thing to do. Christy B says, oh, it's me, Nawa64's son. Okay, now I'm in the loop. Venus Black 8 says, good morning. Let's see. And everybody's mazel toving on CJ. So very good, very good. Good to see everybody. Some new faces, some old faces, some medium-sized, medium-age faces here. Today is an Ask Me Anything session. If you haven't seen one of these videos before, this is the Jew Curious Show. This started off as a podcast about a year ago, like a listening in your earbuds kind of podcast. And over the last few months, have kind of double down on the live video aspect, because a podcast is a wonderful way to learn. I learn through podcasts. I am entertained through podcasts, but they are necessarily sort of monologic and not a lot of back and forth, not a lot of dialogue. And remember that now. Dialogue is going to be very important in conversation later today. But I really like this live format where, you know, people show up with names and faces and locations and give us high fives, let us know that you're part of the community in real time, and also ask great questions. You know, if I'm recording a podcast and I may be asking my guest questions, but it's sort of based on what I think you want to know, not based on maybe what you actually want to know. So I really became entranced with doing these live sessions so that people could ask the questions that they actually have. And these may be questions that I answered in a video a while ago, but you didn't see that video, you weren't there for that, and you're a different person asking the question. So it's really important to me that everybody feels free to ask questions here. And it's called the Jew Curious Show, not the Jewish Show, for one main reason is that you're welcome here no matter where you're coming from. If you have a question about Judaism, about the Jewish people, about some crazy traditions we have, abundant holidays we have coming up in the fall, you are free to ask those questions here, whether you are Jewish, not yet Jewish, maybe you're working on conversion or something like that, or maybe you're really firmly with another faith, but you're curious about the Hebrew roots of your tradition. So, or just, you know, curious about it from a, let's say, world religions point of view. Wherever you're coming from, you are welcome here. If you have questions about Judaism, you have come to the right place, and I'm happy to answer what questions you have. I will say, when you are asking a question, please put a question mark or two on it. It helps, it makes it easier for me to see questions in the chat. The chat can go very quickly. Sometimes I miss your questions, so if I seem to have glossed over it, please don't take it personally. Ask it again. Sometimes there are friendly helpers here who will copy the question and paste it back in the chat. So we try to make sure we get to everything as best we can. And once again, if you're watching on another platform besides Twitch, Twitch is where I answer all the questions live. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and throw it in the comments section or the whatever you call it, the live chat session there. If you're on Facebook, make a comment out of your question, and at the end of the broadcast, I will go back and answer those at the end to make sure that everything is answered as best we can. So I see a bunch of question marks coming in. Rabbi Q? Question mark? Holdover from Friday AMA. You mentioned you were going to share about brainstorming, problem-solving, decision-making techniques, but I think all my questions got you off track. So I was talking about a little brainstorm exercise. I don't know about, you know, individual techniques, although we're going to get into that a little bit today. If you're in the Jew Curious School, this is another way of learning with me and learning with some of the nice people here, is we have kind of a private online school that's dedicated to sort of in-depth learning. We have 2 or 3 live video sessions every week that are then recorded in the archives of the school. So we've got like 100 different videos, give or take, on Jewish topics. We have a complete introduction to Judaism curriculum. We have in-depth courses on, you know, Jewish ideas about God, Jewish philosophy, you know, how to behave in a synagogue, things like that. And of course, kind of a live or community feed going on. There's a sort of a bulletin board situation set up where people are always talking to each other. This week is lesson number 2 in our sort of our mini series on the High Holy Days. So we're having a 4-part course on the High Holy Days. Last week we did the first part, but you can still see it. It's still archived there on kind of the spiritual overview and some practical advice for getting ready for the High Holy Days. Today, our session is about sort of spiritual preparation for the High Holy Days. Before too long here, I think in a week or two, we're going to start the month of Elul, and the month of Elul is all about spiritual preparation. It's sort of like taking stock of what kind of year have I had, Is there ways I'd like to improve upon that in the future? Are there people that I need to make amends with as I go into this season of tshuva, of repentance and return and mending those fences and growing in the coming year? And so we're going to do a lot of brainstorming today and have some specific activities for people. But I'll just mention, sometimes if you're trying to brainstorm something, this is where it came up on Friday. Someone was talking about writing a 100-word theology. This is something that's in the Miller Introduction to Judaism curriculum that I teach for sometimes, where they had different rabbis give their personal theology in 100 words. And so someone was taking a class, and their teacher challenged them, write your 100-word theology. And my best tip that I shared, if you're trying to write something like that, you can get overwhelmed. Like, how am I going to describe my thoughts about God in like a paragraph or two, right? Whatever 100 words is. And my best strategy for that is just set a timer, 5 minutes. Most people have those. Most people who are watching live internet video anyway have some sort of smart device, like a smartphone that has a stopwatch on it or has a timer device on it, or you can set like one of those little dial egg timers that ping at the end. Set or oven timer, microwave, whatever it is, sundial, hourglass thing. Set a timer and just write. Don't edit yourself. Just start writing, what do I think about God? And with that time pressure, it sort of jogs your brain to just bubble stuff up. And with a time pressure, rather than like an open-ended thing, you write faster, and you don't. It sort of takes away some barriers. You don't edit yourself as readily if you can sit there and ruminate on it. That's a great tool that I use for brainstorming. If I need to get some ideas out, I set a timer, just record my thoughts as fast as I can, and I find that even stuff that's buried, the most important stuff to me will come up, and then I can prune it later, or it'll inspire me to come up with other ideas that I didn't think of before. So that's a great brainstorming tip for me. Problem-solving, decision-making, that's another thing entirely. I like to get all the data out first through brainstorming like that, and then you can sit back and look at it and sort of start ranking things. Okay, I've got 100 things that I wrote down. Maybe I'll circle 5, and then that challenges you to just weed out those things and compare things in your values. I mean, we'll have you might see 2 things that are terribly important to you, but then challenge yourself to pick between them. If I had these 2 wonderful things, if I had ice cream and cake, and I like ice cream and cake together, which is part of my problem. I'm trying to lose weight right now. If I had to choose between ice cream and cake, which would I choose? Well, if I had to choose in the moment, I'd choose ice cream because it melts, right? If I was choosing between something that I had to, take with me and eat later in the day, I would take cake because it doesn't melt like ice cream does, right? In this situation, you will have different values apply. So I hope that's helpful for you. That's how I often brainstorm, get a bunch of stuff out. I mentioned that my wife and I recently had an anniversary, and what we do on our anniversary is, and this, I know this sounds very romantic, but we always have a brainstorming exercise where we sit and we write down with like a little 5-minute timer. We write down sort of our biggest dreams in various areas of our life, whether it's career or personal development or adventures we want to have or how we want to give back to the world. And so for each of those categories, we set a timer for 5 minutes and we just start writing down, what's most important to us. And then after that, we kind of share that with each other. And it's become a neat exercise in really getting reacquainted, making an intentional effort to get reacquainted every year, because in a long relationship, especially if you've known somebody for several years and you think you understand them, and you probably take your understanding of them for granted. Sometimes you take them for granted, which is his own problem. But you might say, "Oh, I know what this person's all about." But then having them articulate their big dreams, you might hear something you never heard before, and that's how we kind of get reacquainted. That's how we zero in on what's most important to us, and now we can support each other in those goals as well. And we wrote some of the answers up on our whiteboard on the fridge over here. My wife has some fitness goals, some goals as an activist, some goals for personal finances. I have a lot of fitness-related goals. Run an ultramarathon. I want to continue to grow the Jew Curious school that I was talking about. I want to jump out of an airplane. That's one of my goals this year, is to jump out of an airplane one or more times. I'm gonna try it once, see if I like it, and then really double down on that. And then I'll just drop this in there. I have a secret goal, so I'm not going to tell you what it is. When it happens, I'll tell you all about it. It is related to being a rabbi. It's not going to like take me away from this community too much, I'll say, but it's going to add another dimension to my rabbinate that I'll talk about when it gets here, because I have to. There's some steps I have to take, and if it doesn't work out, I'll be really disappointed. But if it does, I'm going to be super excited to share it with you. So you have another question from CJ May here. Since we're talking about politics in a congregational setting, as a rabbi, you're working to relate to the values of Torah to modern day situations and issues. I can imagine it is a delicate juggling act to try and be somewhat nonpartisan. How do you find that balance between calling out what's happening and maybe not alienating other congregants? Are there, and furthermore, are there specific political issues that you as a rabbi will definitely not touch? So you're asking the question that's top of mind for me today, and this is kind of been the title of this live stream, politics from the pulpit. So this was inspired by the last week or so that I've had. And, I don't want to call anybody out or embarrass anybody. I will observe something that happened to me personally. So in the last week or 10 days, from various parts of a congregation that I serve, that I have been called too political from the pulpit and not political enough from the pulpit. This stems from when it was Tisha B'Av a little over a week ago. I shared a reading that one of my teachers had prepared, talking about in Tisha B'Av we're in mourning. And one of the things that we're mourning, this particular thing was written by Rabbi Dr. R.A. Cohen, and you can find it. It's on Tikkun magazine online. It's a new lamentation for Tisha B'Av, and it's woe to the heart that is not broken. Like, woe to those who see what's happening in the world and are not upset. And it mentions the word, and I just sort of read it. This wasn't. I said this isn't my. This isn't. I didn't write this. A rabbi that I respect wrote this, and I shared it. And it had the word Border Patrol in there. Well, somebody got super upset with me, wrote me a long email, copied 15 people, like 10 or 15 people on it, and said, I shouldn't be subjected to this politicking, and you're, in league with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and that means you're a Holocaust denier. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. And then on the other hand, I had a meeting where somebody said, to me in front of a bunch of people, like, if you do not describe all the horrors in the world right now and draw a direct link from these horrors to our current president, you are being derelict in your duty as a rabbi. And so I'm like, okay, between these two extremes, between me being too political and me not being political enough to satisfy people, there's got to be some sort of medium. But it has challenged me to articulate my personal view of the place of politics, discussion of current events from the pulpit. And I'm going to say again, this is my personal take. You will see examples, plenty of examples out there of rabbis who have a very different take on this, but I'm going to give you my take. And I learn it, and I'll teach this in the name of Rabbi Ed Feinstein, who, for my money, that's a metaphor. I don't actually pay the guy, although he's kol hakavod to him. But in my opinion, one of the best living rabbis, one of the best rabbis living or dead, one of the best sermonizers alive today, rabbi or otherwise, and had the privilege of having him teach our homiletics class, like the year-long seminar on how to write sermons and how to give sermons. And I got to learn this from the best sermon giver out there. I'm not up to his, I'm not up to snuff there, but at least I've started learning from the best. And his take, what he encouraged his students to do, he's like, politics are most appropriate in dialogue. The thing about the pulpit, when giving a sermon, it is necessarily a monologue, right? And you have to realize that if people are there for a service, they are also kind of a captive audience to whatever you want to preach about. And so, if you are preaching about your particular political take, there's going to be a lot of people out there who probably agree with you, and there's going to be a lot of people who don't. And the problem is, and this is not in his words, but from my own research, people take politics more seriously now than they do religion. There's been like neurological studies on this. Like people get fired up about when you challenge their politics more than they get fired up when you challenge their basic religious beliefs, right? And this is a trend. People are taking their politics more viscerally than they used to, and so I really see my job from the Bema, that is, our Hebrew word for high place or pulpit, is to teach Torah. And so if I teach Torah, and to teach Torah in a way that it is received, that it is heard, and that it is learned by people. If I use that to make a political stump speech, I'm doing a disservice to the people who feel kind of, held captive there, and I don't get to engage them in dialogue. I'm giving them a monologue, right? And so I'll say in a different context, if I'm doing like a lunch and learn or like a roundtable discussion, a seminar kind of thing, I'm happy to share my politics with people. And I'll say, and again, we're in kind of a live discussion right now where people can challenge me and people can give me their different ideas, so I feel comfortable saying my politics are largely very liberal. I grew up in a very conservative part of the world, in rural Texas. Both my parents were sort of the black sheep Democrats of their family, and that's what I grew up with. And my political leanings are very liberal. I also have an economics degree, so I'm not just like an idealist. I understand how the things come with give and take. I think capitalism has worked very well for us in many ways. So my politics are very liberal politics, but on the other hand, when I'm in a synagogue, I have to be available to be the rabbi for Democrats, Republicans, independents, alt-right, Antifa, like anybody who's there. I need to at least make the effort that they feel comfortable coming to me with crises in their life, naming a child, burying a parent, right? Things that they need to be able to count on me to do. And if I bully them with my personal politics from a seat of power, then I am doing them a disservice, right? Because then they don't feel comfortable coming to me as their rabbi. And so I've sort of given up if I pick a political stance and preach it from the Bema, I've given up the right to be somebody's rabbi. That's my personal take. And I say this in the face of people who say, well, look, you're worried about offending people with your politics. I'm personally offended that you're not sharing your politics. Like a couple people said that to me this week. Like, I come to the synagogue to be inspired, and if you are not talking about what's happening in the detention centers on the southern border, if you are not talking about the surge in gun violence and what can be done from it from a policy point of view, I feel like you are failing us. My answer to that is, look, in today's climate of widely available, diverse media outlets, everybody who walks into a synagogue, in my synagogue anyway, which is in a university town full of very well-informed people, like, you're not going to walk into the synagogue that day and suddenly be made aware of problems in the world, right? Like, what's going on in the world. If you don't know what's going on in the world and you're waiting to hear about it in a sermon from me, then you're ill-informed. There's TV, there's radio, there's people worried about their mainstream media. I don't worry about that because I think that's a slur on the actual press necessary in a free society. Like, I can't imagine that you're going to learn something from me about current events. Like, you already know what's going on in the world. You already know your opinion about it. And if I preach on that topic, I'm either confirming your biases or shaming your opponents. And my feeling is, if you want to hear a speech that confirms your biases or shames your opponents, watch Maddow. Like, watch Dennis Prager, watch read Breitbart, read, liberal publications. Like, there are plenty of places out there where you can get an in-depth analysis of current events, that either confirms your bias or blows your mind or shames your opposition. You don't need me to do that for you. And so when I feel like when people are calling for me to give big political speeches from the Bema, they're looking for me to be their Maddow or their Dennis Prager, as the case may be, who's a Rachel Maddow if you're not familiar, is a liberal commentator on MSNBC. Dennis Prager is a conservative commentator. I think he did a radio host, podcast stuff. I'm not that familiar, but a conservative commentator, widely known in the Jewish world. And so that's my take, is like, what my job is there to teach what's in the Torah. Sometimes that touches on current events. Sometimes when we have people who are crossing the border legally or illegally looking for asylum, whether it's a legitimate claim or an illegitimate claim, they are strangers in our land. And my learning from the Torah is that you shall not oppress the stranger, and you know what that's like because you were strangers in the land of Egypt, or that's part of our narrative if you weren't, physically, personally a slave in Egypt, although Passover should take care of that for you so that you know what that's like. That's Exodus 23:9. Exodus 22:20 says, don't oppress a stranger, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. I like 23:9 better because it inserts that level of personal empathy. You know what that's like because you were strangers in the land of Egypt, right? If you profess to take values from the Bible and then say it's okay to be cruel to strangers because they're not the strangers that I like, or they didn't become strangers in a way that I agree with, I think that's not teaching Torah, that's burning it or setting it aside, personally. And again, I'm going to say that here in a form of dialogue where people can disagree with me, which is very different from being on the Bema. What I say to people in my synagogue who want to get active politically, and there are some very politically active people in my synagogue, I say, like, I will share outside of the Bema. If I can post an article online on Medium or something, and I think I've put some political stuff on Medium before, if I want to share from my personal Facebook page or this channel, I feel totally comfortable doing that because I can engage in dialogue with people. But from the Bema, my job as a rabbi is to, along with the other people there, help create a space that is conducive to meditation, prayer, worship, and learning. And if the way that I teach robs people of a meditative, prayerful, worshipful space, then I have failed in my job, right? If somebody tells me if I don't articulate a particular narrative of the horrors going on in America and blame the president or particular Congress people for that I'm failing in my job, and that person doesn't understand my job. That's Maddow's job, right? Or that's another commentator's job. What I can teach about is that we are encouraged to be kind to strangers. We are encouraged to not stand idly by when other people are suffering. And I will turn around, and I did this past Shabbos, I did turn around and say, like, look, if you feel passionately about this, then you are responsible for taking action, right? And I said it this week, like, there are things going on in this world. You didn't come in here ignorant of that. And P.S., my list may be very different from your list, but whatever your list is, here's the Torah that helps you work that list, right? Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Do not place a stumbling block in front of people who can't see it. Don't insult the deaf, which means, like, don't insult people who don't have the power to answer back, right? And in a way, I think preaching a particular political stance, and again, this is just me talking, I know there are rabbis who've taken a different tack on this, in a way, giving a sermon endorsing a particular point of view is like insulting the deaf. And when it says the deaf there, just in context, it meant the deaf and the dumb, right? People who can't talk back. And if I get up on the Bema, I make my political case in a forum where people are not encouraged to engage in dialogue because there's 1,000 people in the room and we just don't have time, then that is like insulting the deaf. That is embarrassing or challenging someone who can't talk back to me, which is in clear, violation of Leviticus chapter 19. I want to say it's like verse 16 around there somewhere. There's a whole series there. So that's my take on it. And CJ, who is an aspiring rabbinical student, says, I may be more liberal than that. That's okay. That's your prerogative. I will say that in the last 3 years, and I'm talking, and it's clear demarcation, was the last presidential election cycle and the presidency that's occurred since. I have seen more rabbis who are out and proud about their politics in a number of public forums, including from the Bima, that I have ever seen before. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So if a rabbi can preach from the Bima in a way that allows her or him to maintain a prayerful, meditative, worshipful space for that service, go right ahead. If you are a leader in a almost exclusively conservative congregation and you want to preach conservative politics and people there can still feel comfortable to pray, don't feel bullied by you, still feel comfortable coming to you with their problems and with their life cycles, go for it. I happen to teach in a place that is politically diverse, people with very strong opinions on multiple issues and on opposite sides of those issues. And if I go in, burning hot with one particular political take, then I'm not scared of losing members. I'm not scared of losing donors. I'm scared of people losing their ability to access the Jewish tradition, to access a rabbi, and that's what I care about. I don't care about ticking off donors. I don't care about, somebody might quit, that's their business. I care about somebody losing connection with the Jewish community because they feel bullied by me politically. So that's my take. What I will do is take a very strong tack and say, okay, you may think this way about a particular political issue. You may think a different way. My job here is to teach you the Torah about how to be in community together, right? How to have those conversations civilly, and I have a lot to say about that. Word that I feel comfortable sharing from the Bima. So that's my little rant on politics in the pulpit today. Again, there's going to be rabbis out there who think that I am irresponsibly ignoring what's going on in the world today. How dare you, right? How dare you not call out a surge in anti-Semitic violence that has a lot to do with white supremacy, that has a lot to do with a particular political party, that has a lot to do with being encouraged and baited and egged on by a particular president who advocates this dialogue of separation and blame. And that's, I agree with that 100%. So that's why I'm talking about it here. And that's why I talk about it, on my blog. That's why I talk about it in a couple of Medium articles that I've written. I do not talk about it in a service that's not about me. It's not about politics. It's about Shabbat, or it's about, whatever holiday there is. That's my take. That's a risk I'm going to take. So, somebody said to me this week a couple times in a few different forums, if you're not going to preach the politics that I agree with, I'm just going to go to a different synagogue. And I'm like, that might be the synagogue for you. But I'm much more interested in having a partner that is willing to do the hard work of building trust, of building relationships, so that we can have hard conversations, than partnering with somebody who says, if I don't get my way, I'm going to take my marbles and go home. So that's my take on it. I am very passionate about this, and so I make no apologies for that. So let me take a look at what else has been going on in the chat. I saw a few campaign bumper stickers pop up. People are, I think we got some Bernie supporters and some Warren supporters in here. CJ Mays, let me see. This is getting hot and heavy. Sorry, I know this is bad radio, but I'm just trying to scroll up through here. Let's see. This is a really great question. Christy B. from San Bernardino says, Radio Angel says, wow, that has to be difficult. CJ says, I already know I will be a hella political rabbi, that rabbi getting arrested in protests. And so, yeah, there are rabbis being arrested in protest. There are rabbis getting into caravans and going down to, maybe caravans is kind of a loaded word right now. There are rabbis getting in vans or in groups of people going down to inspect border places. And there are rabbis who are getting arrested in protests at various state capitals. And, here in Los Angeles, we had on Tisha B'Av, people took Tisha B'Av as an occasion to go down to the municipal detention facility to protest, how people are being incarcerated, how the justice system is working, how the immigrant management system is working. There were protests in D.C., in New York, and L.A. on Tisha B'Av, B'Shem Tisha B'Av, like in that spirit of Tisha B'Av, of observing and lamenting how things are, doing something about it. And I haven't been in one of those protests yet. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be. But that's not, so I've picked how I teach. I teach in a synagogue, I teach online. Some teachers of mine also teach from the picket line, and I respect that, and I respect them. It's not been part of my teaching yet. Someday it might be, but I would rather this is my personal take. There are people doing that. There are not, where there aren't a lot of people is liberal rabbis teaching live online. And so that's my strength, that's my niche, so that's where I'm doubling down. Let's see. I appreciated it. Nawa 64 says, I appreciated what Torah and Mishnah have to say about the approach to political views, right? There's some great stuff in Pirkei Avot about that. Like, don't seek positions of power. Like, don't associate with politicians. It doesn't say stay out of politics. It says be wary of politicians, because once they get what they want from you, they're not bound to be your friend anymore. Like, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. On the one hand, Pirkei Avot says, like, stay away from positions of authority, be wary of people in positions of authority, and yet it also says you should pray for those who are in positions of authority. You should pray for the government, right? Because without the government, as it says, people would swallow each other alive. This is one of the more descriptive phrases in Pirkei Avot. Like, without some sort of civilized government, people would tear each other apart or swallow each other alive, as it says in Pirkei Avot. And so I fully believe that. So I'm not seeking political office at this time, but I am praying for those who are in it. Our synagogue is hosting, like, our local congressperson for a Q&A session. So, I think we can have influence on politics as individuals. Should we influence politics one way or another as an institution? I don't know, because there's that synagogue represents a lot of different takes. I've got a car alarm. A little bit of a sound flavor here. Let's see. CJ, you were talking about bubbles here. That's another problem with where we get our media, especially Facebook. We tend to have a bubble of people who agree with us, and that's where we're getting our news from. KG Wilcox says, I love my bubble. CJ says, I do too, but I understand it can be a problem sometimes to be in my own echo chamber. But it is also difficult to engage with the other side. Politics is very tribal. I agree with you. Let's see. D.U. Alexon says, or is it D.W. Alexon? Let's see. Coming from an academic setting, I try very hard, despite the discomfort, to hear and understand things from an opposing side's point of view, regardless of the topic. In my experience, doing so allows you to engage with them more intelligently. KG Wilcox says, I'm in academia too, but that's its own rarefied world. I'm learning to listen, but what I hear is fear, mostly. And Nawa says, I hear it from both parties. I frequently tell my kids, if you only surround yourself with like-minded people, there is a danger of becoming close-minded. CJ says, I'm a PhD student in political science, and I make sure to tell my students, and I'm not here to tell them what to think, but at least back up what they say with evidence. I think that's a good teaching. Evidence is slippery, and KG Wilcox answers, evidence is slippery when sources are seldom agreed upon. But the university can still be an echo chamber. There are not many openly conservative individuals. Also true. So We've already got a great debate going on in here, and so that's I wanted to kind of maybe vent that for my own selfish reasons. That it was a trying week of balancing different points of view in a synagogue about what a rabbi's job is or is not. So I felt compelled to share my own opinion as a rabbi of what my job is. So my job is to bring people together in a way that sort of allows them to pray, to meditate, to worship, to learn Torah, and to teach the Torah that speaks to how people can get along, can create a more just world, create a world of increased peace and compassion, and have difficult conversations with people you disagree with. And to do so in a way that is both, let's say, timely and timeless. Some people say if you're not talking about what's in the newspaper that day, you're not being relevant. And I think that's bogus. I think that's sort of cowardly in a way. There are problems that we have not solved yet, right? I think you can look at all of the teachings, as it says in Baba Metzia 59, I want to say 59b to 60a, that it says this in various places, but this is the one that I'm most familiar with, that there are 36 places in the Torah, and some say 46, depending on who's reading it, where we are adjured to not oppress the stranger, right? And so, for example, not mixing milk and meat says it 3 times, right? Don't murder says it like 3 or 4 times. Don't oppress the stranger 36 times, right? If that gives you any idea about the priority that Torah places on being kind to people seeking refuge with you, but skip B there, but B, how prevalent how prevalent the problem is of the oppression of the stranger. So I always say, like, they don't put speed limit signs up on streets where people aren't speeding, right? If the Torah is telling us something over and over again, it knows that we need to hear it over and over again because that's the most likely commandment for us to break on a daily basis, right? If we didn't need to hear it, it wouldn't say it over and over again. And so that's my take. So let's see. Speaker AJ is here. Says, all right. I remember said this was a discussion in the Jewish Community Center on Facebook earlier. But with a report from the front lines, Speaker AJ says, I am back from the protests in Nashville. Sorry if anyone was offended by comparisons I made this morning. I just responded on Facebook, but I felt compelled to speak out. Shalom. Baruch Hashem for civil debate. So refreshing, says Nawas. CJ says, Kol Hagavod and Yasher Koach on the protests. T-Fox RPG, I've heard it as being a double high. That's 36, yeah. KG Wilcox, what CJ said. So yeah, Yasher Koach on taking part, on exercising your values in public. I am not against that at all. Highly support it, as a matter of fact. And I'll say, like, whatever side of this here, and this, don't take this to me, and I'm saying there are good people on both sides. That's not a quote that anybody's going to tie to me. But what I will say, if you are taking an action to make the world a better place, especially if it's based on your Jewish values, I highly support that. When I say I'm not going to preach politics from the Bima, that doesn't mean that I think politics are irrelevant. It means that I think the place for this is at the level of individual action. And if a synagogue or a Jewish community can help people organize for those actions where people are taking those actions as individuals, I support that 100%. But if you think you're going to bring a protest into a space that was designed for meditation, prayer, worship, then that's not the time or place for it. The time or place for it is in the streets. The time or place for it is on your own blog. The time or place for it is in how you vote, how you contribute. And so I highly encourage people, if your values of not oppressing the stranger, of not standing idly by while something is going on that is detrimental to your fellow human beings, if you're taking action to prevent the blind from being tripped up, to prevent the deaf from being insulted, take those actions. You don't need me to tell you how. There are lots of different ways you can engage in these things. but I will encourage you. You have my blessing, you have my chizuk, my encouragement, my nudge to take those actions as individuals. Let's see. Speaker AJ agreed. Well said, Rabbi. Very much in the spirit of what we did today. Now, 64. What's the policy for the JCC Facebook page? So the policy. If you're not familiar with this, this Jew Curious community has a private Facebook group. Private, like you have to request access to it. You have to answer some questions, and you have to agree to the policy where people are not going to, let's say, sell products, for example. You can share your opinion. You can absolutely share your opinion on different things. We don't, it's not a place of solicitation of people to asking people to buy stuff or donate to particular causes. There are other forums for that, and the main criteria is people have to be civil to one another. You can disagree, right? But you have to. But I insist that people do so in a civil way, not being overtly rude, calling names, things like that. I saw Speaker AJ's post this morning and some negative reaction to that, and I thought, is this the kind of thing that I need to spike? Is this the kind of thing that I need to start throwing down the banhammer on people? And I haven't followed the thread lately. Maybe it got uglier than it was, and I'll take a look at it. But so far, what I saw was not in that spirit. Somebody expressed an opinion based on their Jewish values. Somebody expressed an alternative opinion based on their Jewish values. There was a little back and forth. I think that's a totally legitimate way for that to agree. It's not a synagogue. I'm not there telling people, how to vote, or I will tell people, please do vote, right? I don't think you don't get to claim political passion if you're not going to the ballot box and doing the hard work. But so from what I saw, it was a civil. It was a civil engagement, and thus not worthy. People started dragging people through the mud, calling each other capos, which I personally detest. There's some deep history there. That there I'd throw a flag down and say we're going to stop that. So, but the policy, to answer Nawas's question, is you're free to disagree. I expect people to be civil with one another. If it crosses a line, I will spike people, and it's I don't see it as censorship, because it's not like I'm not shutting down a free press. I'm trying to keep a community where people feel comfortable being in that community. So again, like if I try to get as a lesson on monotheism in the Shema, one of my teachers, Rabbi Leibovitz, said, the Shema is a statement that as a people, the only thing we all agree on is that there is at most one God. Other than that, it's not insisted that we agree about anything, right? We agree that there's one God. That's sort of the basis for one God at most. That's sort of the basis of our bond, or one of the bases of our bond. Other than that, Jews are just as diverse in their political opinions as any other group of people out there, and I celebrate that. Radio Angel says there needs to be neutral spaces. I definitely agree on that. We need places of peace when we're constantly in fear or anger over what is happening, right? And I kind of see, I see a prayer service as necessarily a neutral space. A counter argument to that I heard this week was, well, what about Rabbi Heschel? What about Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was doing this, long-term academic study on the prophets, the Hebrew prophets of the Tanakh, and discovered that they were actively advocating for particular social justice issues, right? But they were also out speaking publicly. They weren't rabbis in a synagogue who were responsible for meeting the needs of a diverse people. They were there speaking their truth. And inspired by that, Rabbi Heschel got involved in the civil rights movement of his era, right? He marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And other civil rights leaders as an expression of his Jewish values, right? And I encourage that, I endorse that, I'm inspired by that personally. At the same time, Rabbi Heschel was not a rabbi in a synagogue responsible for, let's say, the spiritual safety of everybody there, right? Rabbi Heschel was a tenured professor who who wasn't necessarily responsible for making everybody feel safe in that space. He took his learning and he took the inspiration from that learning and acted it out as an individual, right? And maybe, you know, representing the Jewish tradition, but not representing a particular Jewish institution who had a variety of views on that same topic, and he could do that. And in other contexts, if I'm not, you know, if it's not Saturday morning from 9:30 to 12, where I'm responsible for, in part, I'm not the only one. There's cantor and there's lay leaders and stuff like that. You know, that's base, right? 9:30 to 12 o'clock, we're there to worship. We're there to sing. We're there to meditate. We're there to pray. We're there to do some learning from our tradition. And then people can go hit the march all they want. And one of these days, I might also. And that's kind of how I feel about it. So Nawa64 says, something I love about Judaism, diversity and respect of all views, no matter the topic. I'll modify that a little bit. I respect the rights of other people to have alternate views. I don't necessarily respect all of those views. I know it's a fine. I don't know if it's a distinction without a difference. I think there's a distinction and a difference there. I respect the rights of other Jews to have different views from mine. You know, when they cross the line and violate human decency, humiliate other people, denigrate other people, I don't feel like I have to maintain respect for that necessarily, and I will speak out against it. So Radio Angel says, D-Alexin, mine wasn't sadly. Let's see. D-Alexin responding to Radio Angel says, I feel those spaces should be universities. Personally, at least at mine is so. Radio Angel says, mine wasn't sadly. There was a man who walked around with full World War II Nazi uniform on campus, and it was considered okay. Elvella, Piano Girl, has joined us. Hello, it is I, the elf friend. Welcome, Elvella, to a pretty good conversation we're having right now. But everybody say hello, hello, elf. I got some tunes on in the background right now. It just occurred to me. So having a wonderful time. If you guys are just joining us, this is the Jew Curious Show. This is not Maddow. This is not Fox and Friends, although we've been talking a lot about politics today. This is a place where anybody from anywhere can come and ask questions about Judaism, Jewish traditions, Jewish values, Jewish wisdom, Jewish recipes, things like that. And I'm here to answer those questions, whether you are Jewish, not yet Jewish, or just mildly Jew curious, we'll say. So welcome everybody here. And today our topic is politics from the pulpit. This was inspired by some conversations I had last week, and I felt compelled to share my personal take on how I preach and how I don't preach when it comes to current events, when it comes to politics and things like that. So this week, when I was in the synagogue after, and this is my new tagline, I'll say, if somebody comes up to me and says, you know, this or that about politics, I'll say, ask me at Kiddush, right? Because, you know, when I was preaching about a certain thing that was found in the book of Deuteronomy and some other parts of our tradition, because that's what I do, is I like to talk about the Torah portion and its implications for our lives today. And then somebody asked me, when we're sitting around the table after, you know, we make Kiddush, we bless God with wine and with bread and do a little hand washing. And then there's like tuna salad and egg salad and bagels and stuff. And so I'm sitting at a table of like 7 or 8 people. And this person in the synagogue says, so do you feel as a rabbi that you are free to talk about things like the 2 congresswomen who were banned from Israel this week? And so, and I couldn't necessarily tell from the way he was asking the question what his take on it was. I could kind of tell what his take on it was. Do I have a strong opinion about this? I absolutely have a strong opinion about it. I think it's a shanda. I think it's an absolute shame that the President of the United States, for political reasons, would pressure the head of another state to bar American congresspeople from the soil of another country. I think it is a shanda that other foreign head of state, Benjamin Netanyahu, would cave to this request, first of all, like by, you know, what would encourage Congress people to come to Israel to see what's going on in Israel, but pick out a couple of people that were not able to come because of their very public political views, caving to pressure from the president, who made this statement from a who asked him to ban these people for his own political agenda. And I think shame on those two leaders of state all around. Does that mean I agree with these two Congress people, Tlaib and Omar? I absolutely do not. They've said some disgusting things about Israel. And I will add my voice to the dozens of Jewish organizations ranging from AIPAC to J Street, ranging from, all the different seminaries, all the different rabbinical unions and things like that have come out and said, regardless of our negative feelings toward the statements of these two Congress people, banning them from visiting your country is an act of insult against the United States. And so that's how I feel about it. Did I say that at the table at Kiddush? I said, what I said was, I have strong opinions about that if people want to ask me that, but what your question is what's my take on talking about it from the pulpit? My take from talking about it at the pulpit is I don't, because my job is to preserve the sanctity of that space, to teach the Torah that tells us about how to have conversations about that when we are in dialogue, and not weigh in when it's a monologue. And so I kind of made that clear to the people who were there, and I think people appreciate it. People, at least at my table, seem to appreciate that take. And I'll say, look, you want to talk about it one-on-one, I will tell you exactly how I feel about that, as I have done in this public forum. So, and if anybody out there disagrees with me, you're free to shout back. So that's what this is for. Let's see. Woolen Bullets, good to see you here. I'm relieved that I'm no longer on a university campus. The level of hotbed politics and radicalism on all sides feels like it's at an all-time high, rather than being a means of academic discourse. T-Fox RPG. Rabbi, I was wondering how you and your community pronounce what's usually written Amen. I've always heard Amen or Amen. Sometimes you'll hear Omein. That's an Ashkenazic pronunciation of the Aleph and the Kamatz Katan, but I've heard it's not the same everywhere in the U.S. Now you'll hear it different ways. Amen, that I first became familiar with in Christian settings, is it looks like people will say Amen or Amen because it's spelled A-M-E-N in English. It's derivative of a human, that's a little Freudian slip showing. It's the derivative of a Hebrew word spelled Aleph Mem Nun. Which means like ditto, or I agree, or I assent. Also related to the word emunah for faith. Like if I hear something and I have faith in what was said, I say amen. I'd say faith to that, or I agree. And so, how different congregations pronounce different Hebrew words has regional variations, has Sephardi Ashkenazi variations and things like that. It kind of depends on the prayer that I'm saying. If I'm saying Kaddish, I might say it Omein, just because Kaddish is in Aramaic and Ashkenazis sometimes. So you'll hear it different ways. I usually say Amen, or that's how I said it, Amen. But some people say Amen. Some people say Omein. You'll hear different people say it different ways based on how they learned it, based on their ethnic background and things like that. So even the tropes are sometimes different. That's absolutely true. Now, 64 observes the tropes are different from synagogue to synagogue. Sometimes might be big variation in tropes between, let's say, a Reformed synagogue and a conservative synagogue, which is what I'm sort of most familiar with. In Orthodox synagogues might be different. There's different tropes in Ashkenaz and Sephardi representations. There is a Yemenite trope that sounds very different, which coincidentally is the trope I've heard is most often used in British synagogues where people are Yemenite or not. So you will hear different tropes. What the tropes are they're just sort of musical motifs in chanting and punctuating Torah reading. And I say punctuating because if you look in a Torah scroll, there's no punctuation. Like there are no vowels, there's no punctuation, and the only way and how we read it to make it clear where one verse stops and another verse starts is with this musical motif, and that's the musical motif has the commas and the emphasis is and things like that. And so trope is itself an interesting way of punctuating a spoken text, and those musical motifs will vary from community to community. K Dixie says, Trig says hi. She's at work and left her iPad at home. Okay. T Fox RPG says also, D. Willexen, yes, I've seen several swastikas around schools I've been to. Saw a team do a Hitler salute on the train, and someone passed around fascist propaganda at my school a bit back. So that crap is happening. So sorry to use PG-13 or I don't know, PG-8 language. Yeah, that stuff's happening, and I think it's horrible that it's happening. I think we should put a stop to it, and I absolutely think we should put a stop to it. There were, I'll say people felt less free to do that sort of thing a few years ago, and I think that was a good thing. And now people feel more brazen about bringing back old ugliness that I had hoped we had grown out of, at least how we express it publicly. I have no illusion that racism stopped. I have no illusion that people stopped being bigots. Now I think it's easier for bigots to talk to each other and to organize actions. And I think that it's, and I think they're being encouraged by a bigot in chief who is using that kind of bigoted ideology and language to aggrandize himself, to get reelected for the ultimate goal of not any real evil agenda necessarily, but just to have people talking about him every day. I think if that's what the president wanted, mission accomplished. We are talking about him every day. You can't turn on the news without us mentioning his name. And I think that was the goal in the long run. And this person will do whatever it takes to stay in that position. So that's me getting political here in dialogue. Would Rabbi John punch a Nazi? Yeah, I've thought about that. I think I probably would. I don't think I've ever punched anybody in my life. Can I say that? Yeah, I don't think I've ever thrown a punch at anybody. I think I've been shoved and I've shoved back. I'll share something personal. When I was a kid, I was bullied a fair amount. I was not an athletic kid. I was not a popular kid. I lived in a place that was sort of a mix of it was a college town in the middle of nowhere with a big agricultural college. So like half the kids I knew their parents were professors. Half the kids I knew their parents were farmers. And so there was a mixture of kind of town and gown going on. I was much more the unathletic academic. I got bullied quite a bit, but I was also often the biggest kid in the class. And so there was a time where somebody was just kind of, and it was actually a close friend of mine. There wasn't a bullying situation. Like when I was bullied, I would just kind of take it. But there was one time when a friend of mine just kind of teasing me, like pushed me, and I turned around and I pushed him back. And what I didn't take into account is that I was probably 50%, had more mass than he did. And so when I just sort of teasingly shoved him back, he flew back and like hit his head on a tile wall. I think we were in a locker room or something, and started crying. And from like that moment, I was always really scared to use my strength on another person, right? If someone were threatening violence to me or to someone I was responsible for, I would absolutely answer with violence if I had to. If a Nazi was if I saw a Nazi walking down the street, would I cross the street to punch him? No, I'd probably make fun of him first, because that's another, although I try not to humiliate people in public, I think they're asking for an answer in that moment. But if a Nazi threatened me with any kind of, or a modern, neo-Nazi or self-styled, fascist, was threatening me physically, I would answer that threat appropriately if I couldn't diffuse it with words. And it's hard for me to say. It's hard for me to talk about, because I don't wish ill or violence on anyone. But I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Jain. I'm not a Gandhi-styled Hindu. I do believe that passive resistance is 99 times out of 100 way more effective than violent resistance. But we also have something in the Jewish tradition. If someone seeks to do you harm, you are able and encouraged to put a stop to that, whatever it takes. And so that's a even as a liberal, I will take that tack. So would I punch a Nazi? I would if he needed punching. So yeah, if they were just walking down the street protesting, I would form a counter-protest. My favorite sort of counter-protest that I've seen so far, I've begun responding to tweets from the president with the GIF. Here's another political controversy of the laughing green shirt guy. Probably my favorite Nazi counter protest I've heard so far is a guy with a tuba. You can find this video online of somebody who's sort of marching alongside a Nazi protest with like a tuba making ridiculous sort of tuba sound, like doop 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 doop. That is, I think, the kind of counter protest that we need. So let's see what else is going on. Capture card, dang. Yeah. So we're about to wrap this up just because there's some other teaching that I need to get to today. But I hope people haven't been too put off about me teaching more trivia, more Torah. But I thought it was important to talk about, in an increasingly heated political environment, also in a time of lots more sermons that I've got to give on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and holidays like that, to let you know my take. I will share in this dialogue whatever you want to know about my political views, but in the context of a service that is geared toward worship and meditation and learning, I will take that learning opportunity to teach about how to be in community in a civil way, and more than I will take sides on a political issue in a context of monologue. And that's just my learning from Rabbi Ed Feinstein, who has made political sermons before. Last High Holidays, he made he made a sermon where he took a particular political stance, and people got upset with him, and some people were very encouraged by that. And that's also he's been in his community for 20 some years. He's built those relationships where he can have hard conversations with people. And so I'm much more interested in working with people who will build community, build trust, so that we can have productive conversations with each other rather than sort of using me as a bully for their politics against the people in the congregation who disagree with them. Let's see. Yeah, there's the Tuba March guy, Christy B says. T-Fox RPG. Yeah, there's towns in Germany that march along just to drown out Nazis and sell them food and water, but shut down the shops and price the food and water a ton. Let's see. What's going on here? So glad they've started doing that. I went there on vacation once and had to run past a Nazi rally in Berlin. It was scary. Basically, so my understanding, I've quoted this before, there's a radio story I heard a couple of years ago where they're talking about the rise of fascism in Europe, and connected it to the idea that the people who are in power now were born after World War II, right? Increasingly, the people who are in charge of running things and in charge of political parties don't have firsthand experience of the depredations of fascism. And so now they feel like, hey, maybe this was a good idea after all, and may take us into a war where they once again get to suffer the depredations and consequences of fascism. God forbid it gets to that point. Like, we should be smarter than that now. Unfortunately, that's not always true. Let's see. KG Wilcox says, yeah, I think Elvella is having a little trouble with the chat. Just watch the replay afterwards. We're about to shut it down, unfortunately. Check out the replay after the show to catch a conversation. Woolen Bullet says that Germantown also sponsors all the miles, the Nazi Mars, to raise funds for integration of former neo-Nazis. I've seen these sort of great movements of people who were, let's say, former or recovering neo-Nazis, white supremacists, what have you, working with people in those communities to say, look, I've woken up from this. I'm not a part of this, and this is how my life is better now. But I get you. Like, I was where you are. I understand you. I've been in this hole before, and I know the way out. And I think that is way more effective than somebody who doesn't have your experience shouting at you how to change your life. So I think that's a great thing. So, all right, I'm going to have to shut this down for today just because I've got some other teaching that I have to get to. And I really appreciate everybody learning with me today. Got some good questions, mostly me ranting about politics, but it's always a pleasure to be able to learn with everybody who shows up in the live stream. Before I shut down, I'm going to take out my phone and check YouTube and Facebook for any comments that we might have missed. So let's go to Facebook first. Let's see. Oh, I got to turn that down, and get a little feedback. Be the first to comment on this video. Okay, no comments on Facebook. I'll take that. That means more people are coming over to the Jew Curious Show on Twitch, I hope. Let's see. Let's go to YouTube Areno. My first love, my home for live streaming before I found something better on Twitch. Let's see, not seeing any chats here, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up for today. Listen, thank you everybody for being here. It's always a pleasure to learn with you, and we'll just put in another plug real quick. There's a lot of different ways you can engage with this community. You can subscribe to this channel on Twitch, and subscribing, I think it's like $5 a month or $4.99 or something. That means that any of the videos that you see on this channel won't have advertisements on them if you are subscribed. If you like what we talked about today, you can throw some cheer. You can buy some bits from Twitch and throw some cheer at us, and that helps benefit this channel. There's also what you could do is you can join the Jew Curious School, and there's a link to that down in all those little tiles and descriptions below. Join the Jew Curious School. You could try it out risk-free for 30 days. If it's not for you, you can back out. No questions asked, no harm done. But if you get into it and you like it, you can learn with us the weekly Torah portion. We learn live. This week, we are continuing a series on the High Holy Days. And so last week we talked about kind of an overview of the High Holy Days. Today we're going to talk about the spiritual preparation in the month of Elul. Before the next couple of lessons, we get deep into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, respectively. And if you missed those when they're on live, if you're a member of the Jew Curious School, you can see all the lessons we've ever had. There's an archive of over 100 different lessons about Judaism, from the introductory basics to some deep dives into some serious topics. So, plus you get to hang out with the community, which is nice too. With that, I want to say thank you everybody for being here, and until next time, heroes, peace.